sharing the gospel and evangelism as this like daunting task that I could never accomplish. Because I thought about the lostness of the world and how large the lostness is within the world, and I would think, how can I ever make an impact in that? How can I ever impact that at all? And I had a professor, and it was an evangelism professor in seminary, that forever changed how I view my role in discipleship. Let's go to it. So, I had a professor that forever changed how I viewed evangelism. And basically what he did is he talked to us more about discipleship than he did about evangelism. And so he talked about how he viewed evangelism as proto-discipleship or pre-discipleship. You're teaching them the foundations of the faith before they come to faith. And then when they become a Christian, he used the Great Commission that says, go therefore and make disciples. He says it doesn't say go therefore and evangelize people and then say good luck to you. But he said, go and make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them all that I've commanded you. And so he says, so often we view evangelism as it's our job to save them, and then we leave them on their own to figure it out from there. But he actually encouraged us instead to say, if I share the gospel with someone and they come to know the Lord and I'm able to continue that relationship and I live in close enough proximity with them, that I actually continue that discipleship relationship in their lives. And he said something very interesting, and we don't have internet, so I won't show the video, but I'll explain the video to you. There's a video I wanted to show that I've used before that talks about the difference between evangelism and discipleship, and how if I shared the gospel and reached 1,000 people a day, if I'm seeing 1,000 people come to know the Lord every day, and you think, wow, that's quite an evangelist, it would take something like 15,000 years. And one thing this evangelism professor did, and actually I was the example for this. He had two people come up front in the class. He said one person shares the gospel with someone, they bring someone to know the Lord, and somebody else disciples someone. And he said the person that shares the gospel, they share the gospel with Bronco. Bronco comes to know the Lord, and he stands here. But then Bronco just stays over there, and he's just now a Christian. Good luck. You're on your own. And then this person then shares with one other person, and you have 1, 2, 3. And then you have over here this picture of discipleship and multiplication, where Frank shares with Tim, but then Frank disciples Tim. And then the next year, Frank and Tim are leading people to Christ. And they lead Denny and Fiona to Christ. And then it goes from 1 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8, and it continues to double. And with a mindset of discipleship, if everyone actually continued this process, you could reach the entire world in less than 40 years. Let that sink in. 15,000 years sharing the gospel with 1,000 people every day, seeing 1,000 people come to know the Lord. But discipling one person for 1 year that could then disciple someone else the following year and bring someone else to come to know the Lord and disciple them, in 37 years, we could see the entire world reached. Sometimes the big grand gestures actually aren't as effective as just small efforts of obedience. And so I want us to just shift how we think about evangelism. And specifically in the international context, in the post-Christian Europe, oftentimes the standing on the street corner with the loudspeaker is laughed at and mocked with the post-Christian mindset. While that may be effective in some circles, oftentimes it's not very helpful in this circle here with internationals in a post-Christian Europe. But instead, what they're looking for is someone that will listen to them, someone that truly cares about them. And that happens through relationship. And it creates the opportunity for proto-discipleship, sharing the foundation of the faith, and as they begin to ask questions, they become more and more interested. And so I think it's a model that we can actually do here. So I want to think about the circles of influence that we have. And I want to think about not creating all new structures for yourself, but I want to think about using the things you already do for the gospel. Like I said, the first session and this session, not terribly complicated, but I think if we're faithful with it, it can be greatly impactful. So here, the big idea, if I could summarize it, is God made us to be salt and light to the unbelieving world around us. Okay? And I get this from Matthew 5:13-16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it become salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify the Father who is in heaven. When salt enters food, it gives a distinction to it. It's different. It adds flavor. We should live in the world in such a way that they say, there's something different about them. There's something about their life that's powerful and impactful. What is it? And then it also says, and we should be like a light, like a city on a hill. You can't cover that up. It doesn't matter how far away you are. You see it up there. As you drive and get closer and closer to a city, you see the lights from the city. And so, we're to be like salt and light. And why is that? It says, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works, that they may see your life and glorify your Father who's in heaven. I pray that we live in such a way that people begin to say, wait a minute, why? And at that point, we have to be prepared to tell them why, and we have to take opportunities to tell them why everywhere in between. But I want us to think about that. So, how do we engage with the unbelieving world around us? I want to encourage us to do something very simple. Identify 1 to 5 people that you know that aren't Christians. You say, that doesn't seem like a very big number. That's on purpose. And then within that, think about these 5 categories. 5 circles of influence, as you could say, that you currently have. And so think about the unbelievers you know in these categories. At work. You may say, I work at home, or I work in a Christian environment. Well, don't worry, we'll keep going. There's more categories for you. But even if you work in a Christian environment, when you have events, do you work with vendors that are not Christians? Do you go to events and work with other organizations that are not Christians? You have relationships in that, even if you're a Christian organization, that you have opportunities to engage. It may only be once or twice a year with some of you if you're in a Christian organization. But pour into those relationships. Get to know those people when you have the opportunities. In your family. Oftentimes this will include extended family. May even be family in another country. You may only see them once or twice a year. Well, when you see them, are you living out the hope that you have in Christ in front of them? Or, like I said, if you stay at home, if maybe you're a parent that stays at home, discipling your kids is of the greatest importance in your lives. So never diminish even your role. Like I tell Amanda regularly, what she does is very important, even in staying at home. In raising Julia up to know the ways of the Lord. And so, at work, in your family, then we think about in our neighborhood where we live. Most likely, in Bratislava or in the regions around Bratislava, many around us don't know the Lord. Even if they claim to be Catholic or even Protestants, many are not practicing. Many are not actively living out their faith. And so we have numerous opportunities when we think about the neighborhood where we live. Do you know your neighbors? I know there's language barriers. I know there are challenges. But you'll be surprised sometimes when you start talking to people how many people there are actually around you that you can connect with. And so, at work, in your family, in your neighborhood, in your recreation or leisure time, what do you do with your free time? What do you enjoy to do? Invite non-Christians to join you. If you like cycling, maybe at work, you say to one of your non-Christian friends, hey, I'm going cycling this weekend. Do you want to come? And notice what I'm saying here, this isn't some, in the States we would say some bait and switch. This isn't like we're trying to trick people or manipulate them. No, we're trying to be friends with non-Christians, with really no motivation other than to show them the love of Christ. Okay? So in our recreation and leisure time, for me, it's always basketball, or at least some kind of activity. It may be cycling, maybe running or hiking. But if I go, I'm usually going to be around non-Christians. I thought of an example, and I told Zlatko this earlier. There's a guy that I've been playing with that's from Serbia. He's from Belgrade. And one of the first weeks I met him, at the end of a game, you're supposed to call your foul, and if you don't, you're not supposed to get the ball back. And I got fouled, and I didn't call it. And they said, did you call your foul? And I said, no. So it's their ball. And this guy from Serbia gets mad and kicks the ball, and because it was the last point of the game. But I was going to be honest, because I didn't call the foul, so I didn't deserve to get the ball. And we ended up getting the ball back and winning the game. And after we're done, he says, what brings you here? And I said, I'm a pastor. And he said, oh. And then he immediately tells me he's an agnostic, and he begins to open up a bit. And our conversation ends, and we leave. And I come back the next week, and guess who comes and sits next to me? Same guy. He wants to talk. He just wants to hear about my life a little more. About me ending up here. How'd you end up here? And then this week, we got a car this week. I was thrilled to have it. And as I get ready to leave, there's a truck unloading all of their water for one of the businesses nearby, right in front of my car. So I'm stuck there for 20, 30 minutes. And I see, sure enough, my Serbian friend getting coffee right there outside. And I go sit with him and one of the other guys that's also from Serbia, and we sit and talk. Did we talk about Christ? Not yet. Did we talk about a lot of things they're interested in? Yep. Did we talk about some things about religion and their views of religion? Yep. But I was already going to play basketball. I'm just utilizing something I was already going to do for the gospel. And so I want us to think about it in those kind of categories as we think about that. And then the fifth and final one is, where do you regularly shop? Where do you go to buy electronics, to buy groceries, to buy whatever it may be? And especially for our Slovak speakers, I want to encourage you. Do you go to the same person every time you check out? Do you get to know them? Even if it's only 2 minutes that you see them. Do you ask questions? How are you doing? I'll never forget, there was this guy, he was an exchange student that was at university in the States where I lived. And he was from Africa. I forget what country in Africa, but he was studying at one of the universities in North Carolina where I was. And every time I went to the grocery store, I saw this one guy. And I went through his line. How are you? How's school? How are your classes? He'd tell me what class he's in. He'd tell me which one he's struggling with. And the next time I saw him, I said, hey, how'd that exam go? Oh, it's good. And at first, it was just kind of like, okay, keep moving. But after a few months of seeing him once a week, he'd see me and he'd wave at me. Hey, it's a talkative guy. But you never know what kind of opportunities those present. And so I'm just encouraging us, do the things you were going to do anyway, but do them with this, as we'll talk about tomorrow, with gospel intentionality. The pastor of the church where I did my internship, he's He's good friends with David Platt, and some of you may know David Platt. He wrote the book Radical, and it's this big book of this is the importance of living our faith radically. And my pastor at the church where I did my internship is Tony Merida, and he said, my attempt to write radical is this. And he says, not radical, but I've named my book Ordinary. And he wrote a book called Ordinary. And he says, do ordinary things with gospel intentionality. And that's powerful. And so I want to encourage us to think about that. Think about how many of you in your workplace interact with non-Christians all the time. I can't be in that same place as you. God has not given me that circle of influence. Think about where you live. Also not my circle of influence. Things you do in your recreation time. Most likely not my circle of influence. So think about those. Think about where you regularly shop. And so it may be that you get to know the manager. You go into the Tesco, you get to know the manager, and you say, hey, good to see you again. If you find out they speak English, get to know them, ask questions. And so then after this, I now say, how can you connect with unbelievers? Because you may say, I'm an introvert, I'm not a talker, I'm not this. What can I do? Well, one thing that's important, especially when we think about our workplace, hospitality. Sometimes people may be hesitant to come to your home. But you can say, hey, can I take you to lunch? Hey, can we go to lunch sometime? Hey, my family's having dinner at this place next week. Would you like to join us? And remember, we talked about in the last session about inviting people in. It's nothing extravagant. But I had a professor in one of my seminary classes. He's a pastor in a pretty rough part of Atlanta. He's an African-American pastor. And he used the phrase, and I love this phrase, he says, I want to put the family of God on display for the watching world to see. He said, I'm just inviting people in to see Christians. He says, because it should look different. We're still normal people doing normal things, but we have a hope that comes through Christ. And so we start with connecting through hospitality. Maybe inviting people into our home. It may be connecting in different ways. It may be going for coffee from time to time. Then from there, you think about service. Do you try to serve others around you? Oftentimes, this post-Christian culture, they really care about doing good things. They really want to be good people. And they oftentimes are willing to serve. And many times you can say, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you want to come with me? Yeah, I'd love to help with that. That's a connection point for you. And so I'm just thinking about being creative about how to connect with people. And you'll be amazed when you get to know people, if you really listen, how many actual ways we can connect with people and how many areas of common ground we can have. And then from there, I think about prayer. I have a friend that literally his evangelism technique is he walks up to strangers and says, how can I pray for you? He says, you'll be amazed how many people it's just like, this is going on in my life. Well, some of them even start with, I don't care anything about God, but you do, so can you pray for me about this? You'd be amazed sometimes. Restaurant, hey, we're going to pray for our food. Is there anything we can pray for you about? Asking your waiter or your waitress that. It's simple things, but it's connections in the things you're already doing. So asking people how you can pray for them. I remember I had a coworker in one of the schools I was in when I worked in the school system in the States, and he had some serious things going on with his daughter. I said, hey, man, I'll be praying for you on that. He said, I'm not a praying man, but I do appreciate that. He was an irreligious, atheistic guy, but he said, I really do appreciate that. That's an opportunity to connect with people when you ask them how you can be praying. Then, within that, think about conversation. There used to be a time where it was more of like water cooler talk. You know, you stood around the water cooler, but now oftentimes it's, hey, look at this video I found on YouTube, or hey, something at work you see and you connect over. But then from there, you end up talking about the football match that happened or some current event or some political thing. But do you ask questions to understand? These two Serbian guys yesterday, I sat with them and I said, hey, tell me about your experience in Serbia. They found out I lived in Hong Kong, and they wanted to hear about Hong Kong and the things that are changing between China and Hong Kong. And they wanted to talk about the connection between China and Serbia. I just wanted to listen. And just ask questions. Hey, tell me about that. Let me hear that. And then we talked about America, and we talked about all these different things, and individual culture and collective culture, and we were just learning about each other. And so, conversation. And then from there, think about friendship and trust. When you really care for unbelievers, they reach a point. I don't agree with anything that you view religiously, but I know I can trust you. So I wanted you to know, can you pray for that? Sure. But are we taking the time to actually let people into our lives to hopefully impact them so that they view us as friends, as trusted people? And then the final thing, and this is something that should be present throughout, but I say proclamation. Telling the gospel to people. Prepared to speak of the hope you have within you. I can't tell you how many times people say something and they say, you're always so... I'll never forget it. One time I was at a training. I worked for a nonprofit called Communities in Schools, and we worked within schools, and we were at a training. I'm with all non-Christians around me, and I had a guy that said to me afterwards, it was interesting, because I said in the session, we were talking about how just mean kids can be. Well, kids can just say the meanest, dirtiest things to adults just to try to get a rise out of you. And I looked at them all, and I said, you're not defined by anything anyone says about you. What these kids say about you, it doesn't define you. If it's true, maybe you need to think about that. But if it's not true, you can just let it go. And I had a guy come up to me afterwards. He said, but Nick, I don't have the same kind of confidence you have. And I said, I don't either. But through Jesus, I know who I am. And he was like, and he was not a Christian, but it was like, it caught him off guard. But it was like, I'm defined by Jesus. That's why I'm not offended when a kid says something crazy to me. And so, proclamation. When someone says something to you, are you prepared to say, let me tell you why I view life this way? Let me tell you a little bit about my worldview. What an opportunity we have to engage with the unbelievers around us. And so, think about, even if it's just one, identify one person. And then something I want to encourage you to think about. Think about ways, and this is one of our questions in the small group discussion. How can you include other Christians on participating in that? So if you have a non-Christian coming to your house, maybe you could say, hey, Frank, I got an unbeliever coming. You want to come to dinner too? I want to put the family of God on display. Come hang out with us. Invite others in, because guess what? That gives them an opportunity to learn and grow. That gives them an opportunity to speak the gospel into someone's life. I can't tell you how many times people have said, hey, can you share the gospel with this person? And I'll say, hey, can we share the gospel with this person? Invite me in to be a part of it. But it shouldn't be something I just do. It should be something we do together. And so, once again, continuing this idea of community together, participating in this all together. So, small group discussion now. Just like we did in the last one, I want us to split in groups. I encourage us to split into different groups this time. Don't sit with the same group exactly again. I want us, while I encouraged you in the last session to get to know individuals and also in this larger group time, I want us to get to know more people than just our kind of cliques that we normally go to, our small groups we normally lean towards. So, a couple of questions for us to consider. What are some of the challenges or fears of putting this into practice? Same question as earlier. But now we're thinking about engaging with the unbelieving community. What excites you most about this? What additional training or support can we offer? And then the final question is, how can you invite other Christians to participate in your interactions with unbelievers? So think creatively about how you can actually include other people into some of your circles of influence. So let's take 20 minutes, split into groups of 4 or 5, and we'll discuss that. All right.